Okay, Jennifer.
Thank you, Meg. And thank you, Amber, so much for your kind introduction. The Osher Lifelong Learning Institute at George Mason University has been in existence for over 30 years. We serve curious individuals who participate in lectures, clubs, trips, and special events, as well as volunteer opportunities such as teaching and service on committees. There are many things you can learn and do at the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute at George Mason University. And I want to welcome all of our Ollie Mason members, as well as those of you who are in Virginia and across the United States online through our AARP connection. You can learn more about Ollie at olli.gmu.edu. And we are very happy to be collaborating to bring you our wonderful presenter today, Dr. David Mould. Dr. Mould is Professor Emeritus of Media Arts and Studies at Ohio University. Born in the UK, he worked as a newspaper and TV journalist before moving to the United States in 1978. David has traveled extensively in Asia and Southern Africa, and his travel essays and articles have been published in Newsweek, the Christian Science Monitor, as well as other print and online outlets. David's books include Postcards from the Borderlands in 2020, Monsoon Postcards, Indian Ocean Journeys in 2019, and Postcards from Stanland, Journeys in Central Asia in 2016. Please welcome David Mould.
Thank you very much, Jennifer, and thank you, Amber. And anytime anybody reads a bio like that, it makes me feel quite old. Okay, I'm going to begin by just explaining my virtual background. I guess if it's with an India presentation, you're expecting to see the Taj Mahal, but this place is, in its way, just as impressive as the Taj Mahal. It's called Golconda, and it's on a hill outside Hyderabad, a very large city in south central India. We're going to be going there a little bit later, but it's this wonderful medieval fortress where the local rulers rule the plains around them and mined diamonds, including the Koh-i-Noor diamond. So just a little explanation there. Okay, I'm going to share my screen here. I'll just make sure everything's working here. Okay. So just a caveat to begin with. This is my take on India, and as I'm going to, I think, explain or clarify, I really don't think of India actually as a country. I think of many Indias, and it's going to be different from, Amber's take. She's been there many times. It'll be different from everybody else's take. So I just want to, preface by saying, it's my kind of personal experience of India. I've been to India, I think, about a dozen times, most recently in 2019, just before COVID hit. And I can't wait to get back. Unfortunately, India's been in the news for many reasons recently. Most worryingly because of the Delta variant. It's been very difficult over the last 2 years to talk with Indian friends and colleagues as they've been going through a very, very difficult time. In fact, Amber and I were talking just briefly before the presentation began. She was there during the lockdown in 2020 when literally millions of people, were without work and they couldn't get home. The effect of COVID on India has been enormous, and you may remember the terrible television pictures of people trying to get oxygen tanks. So India has suffered a lot recently. Let's hope the worst is over there. But I've been thinking a lot about India over the last 18 months. So I've done a lot of travel over the last 25 years or so. I think this is a pretty complete list. As a trainer, a teacher, a researcher, and a consultant, most of the time, let me put it this way, I've been lucky enough to go at somebody else's expense, not not as a tourist. I've been there to work, and as I've worked, I've recorded my impressions, I've written articles, and I've written essays. And over the years, these have yielded 3 books, each of which have got postcards in the title. Postcards from Stanland, Central Asia. That's a region where I worked from about the mid-1990s through to about 2012 on and off. Most of what I'm going to present tonight comes from my second book, Monsoon Postcards, Indian Ocean Journeys, which focuses not only on India, but on Madagascar, Bangladesh, and Indonesia, around the Indian Ocean. And my most recent book, Postcards from the Borderlands, kind of looks at the way in which we perceive borders around the world, with some good border crossing stories involved. And I sort of think of myself as an accidental travel writer. As I said, I'm not famous enough for somebody to pay me to go somewhere to write about a place, but I have been hired to go to places, and as I travel around, I write about them. And these are my travel mantras. I mean, I very much go with Paul Theroux's notion that, you've got to really go with the flow. You've got to experience the culture, soak it up, and put up with the hardships and the nuisances of travel. Actually, that's part of the fun of travel, in my opinion, dealing with difficulties as they arise, figuring out how to get from one place to another. And that rather pithy quote from the travel writer Thomas Swick, travel's only interesting when things go wrong. Now, I mean, what he means by that is that, if you have a perfect trip and everything's on schedule and there are no issues at all, there's nothing worth writing about. So I do better traveling in countries like India, where things do go wrong, but the experience of them going wrong is interesting by itself. So this is the way that the government of India, the tourist officials, the hotels, the tourist industry in India would like you to perceive India. This is from a campaign that ran in print and on television a few years ago. Incredible India, these wonderful landscapes, these, so much color, so much excitement. Great vistas, beautiful temples, great lakes, and everything like that. Well, that's incredible India. This is the India that I've experienced more often than that one. It's incredible, but it's also infuriating and sometimes just inexplicable. I'm going to start by reading just a short excerpt from my book, Monsoon Postcards, and it's really about a first encounter with India. And I think it's probably one that anybody visiting India for the first time might empathize with. As a Westerner visiting India for the first time, it's easy to feel overwhelmed. You know the basic facts. India is the second most populous country in the world, 1.3 billion people. It's diverse in topography, ethnicity, language, religion, culture, and cuisine. Nevertheless, after you've pushed your way past the hotel and taxi touts at the airport, shooed away the gaggle of young boys fighting to carry your bags, and settled into the air-conditioned comfort of the official car or the hotel shuttle, India still assails your senses. There's nothing that can prepare you for the crush of people, cars, auto rickshaws, handcarts, bicycles, and people on the streets. Street vendors hawking, and this is actually a list I made while I was sitting at a traffic jam, snacks, newspapers, cheap toys, sunglasses, pens, pencils, balloons, coconut slices, and mobile phone car chargers move among the stalled or slow-moving vehicles. Beggars with long, straggly greying hair, sad-eyed children and women with babies bundled on their backs knock on the car windows, holding open their hands. Look away and don't open the window, your driver instructs, hitting the automatic door lock. You feel guilty about ignoring suffering, but at the same time you check your billfold or purse to make sure that nothing is missing after the jostling at the airport. The guidebook warned you about pickpockets. Your car passes rows of dilapidated concrete apartment blocks, their courtyards strewn with trash. Along the roadside and the railroad tracks are rough, single-room shanties, bamboo poles framing rusting sheets of metal, cardboard, tarpaulin, and plastic. Outside, literally on the street, women are cooking on stoves or open fires and bathing their children. In parks, alleys, and under bridges, those who don't have a shanty claim a few feet of grass or dirt for a sleeping space, laying out a blanket and a few possessions. Yet, and this is, the contrast you see, I think, in every Indian city, a few hundred yards further on, a residential compound of smart, high-rent apartments, an electronic security gate, a guard post, and cameras. Your car passes modern office towers, ornate wedding palaces, brightly coloured Hindu temples, and white-wall mosques, and a moving window display of commercial signage, some of it in rather comic English. The malls are packed with shoppers. You arrive at your hotel, and this is a Taj Deccan in Hyderabad. I have stayed there, surrounded by brick walls topped with barbed wire and spikes. One hotel member opens the car door, two more carry your bags. The doorman looks as if he'd stepped out of a military parade ground or a TV period drama. 6 feet tall, well-built, he's resplendent in his yellow turban and tailored white suit. He salutes you smartly. For an instant, you imagine, or at least I imagined, you're back in the time of the Raj. You're a British colonial officer with a small army of staff at your bidding. Then reality returns. You're in a modern hotel with air conditioning, Wi-Fi, and room service. CNN is on the TV monitor, the sound muted. The low-level music sounds familiar, but somehow out of place. Then you catch the tune. Let it snow, let it snow, let it snow. Surreal. The dark-suited desk clerk smiles and gives you your key. Welcome to the Taj, sir. I hope you have a pleasant stay. Faced with crowds, poverty, pollution, trash, traffic congestion, crime, some people find India too much to bear. But if you're prepared to take India for what it is, often messy and disorganized, occasionally dangerous, always unpredictable, and put up with some inconveniences and hardships, you'll be well rewarded. You'll also feel humble, as I do, when Indian friends and colleagues start talking about history, religion, and culture. India is an epic of epics, spanning thousands of years, war and conquest, the rise and fall of great civilizations, architecture, literature and art, migration and settlement, commerce with Asia, Europe, and Africa. Most visitors long ago accepted that any generalizations about the country are at best tentative, at worst misleading. There's not one India, but many Indias. And India is not only, as the tourism slogan goes, incredible, it's inexplicable. So how can we get our head around India? I'm desperately waiting for India to do its decennial, every 10-year census so that the economists can update this map. But this is one way to look at this. This is based on the results of the 2011 census. And what the economists did, and I thought it was a brilliant way to do it, was it took the states of India, and there's been one change in the states in the south, in Andhra Pradesh and Telangana, took the states and by population, and it compared them to countries in the world, just to get a sense of this huge population here. So look at Brazil in the north. That is actually Uttar Pradesh, which is India's most populous state. It's a little larger than the United Kingdom in land area. But its population now is well over 200 million. So, and this was kind of the way the economists put it, if Uttar Pradesh declared independence today, it would be the 5th largest country in the world. And I think that's a rather helpful comparison where, when you start thinking about, the massive population of India. But the other side of the coin here is, yes, there's a lot of people there. What about the economy? What about their standard of living? So these are sort of the current figures here. So UP population in 2010, it's estimated to be about 231 million right now, roughly equivalent to Pakistan. So it's kind of moved up a little bit in terms of how large a country it would be if it declared independence. But looking at the size of the economy, in 2010, its total economy, gross domestic product, was roughly equivalent to that of Qatar, which is a very, very small but very rich state in the Persian Gulf. And today, it's about the same as Peru. So, think about the size of the population, think about the size of the economy. And I don't have an estimate for how it would look today, but the gross domestic product per capita adjusted for purchasing power parity in 2010 equivalent to Kenya. It's a poor part of the country. But of course there are rich parts of the country as well. And so, I'm just going to skip that one there. So, that's one way to think about India. Another way to think about India, I think, is in terms of religion, and we'll be getting back to religion, or rather the tragic effects of religion, a little bit later. And I am certainly no expert on religion here, but suffice to say that religion is in everything. It's in politics. It's in culture. It's in daily life. Now, here are the raw figures. 80% of the population, about 1 billion, claim to be Hindus. I say claim to be Hindus. I get a little suspicious when of these sort of demographic labels here. It's like saying so many people are such a percentage of Christians. Well, they may claim to be Christians. How often do they go to church? So the same question for the Hindus. Yes, you say you're a Hindu. How often do you go to the temple? Okay. But to me, the most staggering thing is that almost 200 million Muslims in India, and we will look at the issue of partition in a little bit later. But this makes it the 3rd largest Muslim population in the world. And again, there are many other religions that are represented in India. So religion has always been the big divisive force in India. I think it will continue to be. But as I say, it permeates every part of life, and particularly politics, I think, today. The other thing is, caste. I think a lot of this now has gone online or on social media, but one of the great fun things to do if you're visiting India is to I think you sort of pick up the Sunday newspaper and see who's trying to marry who. And this is all defined to a great degree by caste. Now, caste is extremely complex issue. I mean, there are thousands of dissertations written about caste. Suffice to say, I mean, caste has become very, very political as well. India has, I think, rightly tried to raise the economic status of the historically underprivileged castes. And that has resulted in certainly some economic improvements for some of them, also university places, government jobs are reserved for specific castes, which has led to a sort of a rather perverse kind of reaction where people have actually applied to drop in caste level. If you drop into caste level, if you become one of the, they have these terrible acronyms, the OBCs, the other backward castes. If you drop that level, maybe you'll get a university place that you wouldn't get if you were in your current caste. So, I mean, the caste system, again, permeates every aspect of society. I mean, and a lot of people say this should be changed, but it's really, really difficult to change something that's so embedded in the culture. Okay, with apologies to Ian Foster for the title on this slide, I'm going to tell you a little bit about how I got interested in India. As the introduction said, I'm originally from Britain, and I grew up in the 1950s and the 1960s. I didn't know much about India at that time. It was this blob, usually pastel pink or sort of this brown color on the world map. It was the third largest after Canada and Australia, and the most populous country in what was now called the British Commonwealth, not the British Empire anymore. And the newspapers sometimes mention the 1947 partition of British India into India and Pakistan, but they made it sound like a very neat and orderly transition, which it certainly was not. I knew India had a hot climate. I knew it suffered from natural disasters such as floods and earthquakes. I knew the Indians were very good at cricket. And I started to seek bus conductors on the London transport system. They were opening Indian restaurants or curry houses in London. My family, at least my father, was rather conservative about food, so we didn't go. He said, we don't know what's in that stuff. In my education, and I mean, I always loved history, in the history books, there was the imperial narrative. British merchants, missionaries, soldiers and administrators went to India. They brought order and civilization to this subcontinent of feuding Maharajas and restless masses. It was all good there. The East India Company, the original commercial concern there, helped India develop its economy through global trade. It created an educated professional class, established a rule of law, and an administrative system. So the British engineers built the railroads, and they built the telegraph line. And the army, the East India Company army and the British army after that, defended India from hostile forces. There were the Burmese and the armies of Imperial Russia to the north. Russia trying to get through to the Indian Ocean in what historians have called the Great Game, sort of fought out over northern India and Nepal and Central Asia today. So that was sort of the kind of, shall we say, the official view. That was the history that I was kind of brought up with. The reality, of course, is very, very different. Britain were, after World War II, was financially exhausted, and I think exhausted in terms of human resources. The nationalist movement had been growing in India, and it was evident that Britain would have to leave. And in the end, it happened very, very quickly in 1947, and we'll look in some detail at the tragic results of that. So British India was divided along religious lines into majority Hindu India and a majority Muslim Pakistan. But that still left a lot of Muslims in India and a lot of Hindus in Pakistan. It was not neat and tidy. And the two parts of Pakistan, west and east, were separated by 1,400 miles of India. What could possibly go wrong with that? We will never know how many people fled or were told to leave their homes, the widespread communal violence that occurred. Now, technically what happened, and we'll come back to this in just a few minutes here, is that if you look on the map on the left, the pink parts were British provinces. Okay. And the yellow parts, and I've circled Hyderabad there because we'll get to Hyderabad in a moment, the yellow parts were ruled by traditional rulers, Maharajas and people with other titles, kings, Maharajas, who kind of had a lot of control over, shall we say, the internal administrations of their kingdoms or states. The British took care of foreign policy and defense, but in terms of what's happening within, in the yellow parts here, the traditional rulers were in charge, and they were left to sort of decide what was going to happen to their states. But I mean, as we'll see in a moment, it's a real geographical problem here. So in principle, they were going to join either India or Pakistan based on whether they had majority Hindu or Muslim populations. So how did this happen? Well, not well. The guy on the right, his name is Cyril Radcliffe. He was a lawyer who was sent out from Britain. He had no experience in India at all. And they said to him, Cyril, we need you to draw the borders between India and Pakistan. And you have a limited time to do it and limited resources as well. The British, as I say, were in a hurry to leave. So he worked with outdated maps, inaccurate census figures. And the big problems occurred, and we'll talk about Hyderabad in a moment because it's a somewhat different issue, in three large provinces, the Punjab, Jammu and Kashmir, roughly the same numbers of Hindus and Muslims. Punjab, Jammu and Kashmir in the northeast, and Bengal in the west. And I mean, the number 12 million is actually a fairly arbitrary one. Lots of people found themselves where they did not want to be. And they abandoned their homes, they abandoned their jobs, they sometimes came with absolutely nothing to move to the other side, Hindus to India, Muslims to Pakistan. And Radcliffe went back to Britain. He burned his notes after he got back, and there's this wonderful quote from him, there'll be 80 million people with a grievance looking for me. I don't want them to find me. But he was knighted for his efforts. I'm just going to tell a story here from one of my colleagues and friends, Suruchi Sud. She teaches at Drexel University in Philadelphia. We've worked years on projects in especially in South Asia, most recently in Bangladesh. And Suruchi, I mean, I asked Suruchi, I mean, I think we were just driving somewhere, and I kind of asked her about her parents, and the story came out, and it actually went into my book. So I'm just going to read this here. We weren't allowed to utter the word Pakistan in my household. Suruchi recalls, as far as my grandmother was concerned, partition never happened. Partition shaped the lives of both of Suruchi's parents. Both were from Hindu families living in the Punjab, but from different backgrounds. During British rule, Suruchi's mother's family were loyal civil servants. At partition, the family moved to Delhi, where her grandfather worked for the Central Bureau of Investigation, India's domestic security agency, equivalent to the FBI, and the family lived comfortably in a government house. Suruchi's father's family was from a city called Lalpur, an industrial and transportation centre that, now named Faisalabad, is the third most populous city in Pakistan. Her grandfather was active in the independence movement, and in 1947, when partition came, he and his 6 brothers were serving prison terms for anti-British activities. Suruchi said, when partition came, my grandmother decided to stay. She didn't know whether or not her husband was alive. She hoped a male member of the family would return with news. But she knew she had to get her children to safety. So she took my uncle, Suruchi's uncle, who was 12, and my father, who was 8 at the time, to the station and shoved them, and she did say shoved them, on a train to Delhi. There was pandemonium. They left with just the clothes on their back, nothing more. The train was crowded. My father was inside, my uncle on the roof. In the confusion, the brothers were separated. My dad remembers it as a terrifying time. Suddenly he's in a foreign country. He doesn't speak the language. He speaks Punjabi, not Hindi. Remarkably, the brothers were taken to the same refugee camp where they were reunited. Suruchi's grandmother left Lalpur on the last convoy the Indian army sent into Pakistan to escort Hindus. They sent trucks with loudspeakers around the city. They said that if you don't leave now, we won't be able to guarantee your safety because in 2 days this will not be the same country. She left carrying only her jewelry. In Delhi, she looked up a cousin whose husband, a well-connected doctor, managed to locate her children. She sold her jewelry and cleaned houses to make ends meet. Her husband had died of TB in prison, so she was now a single parent. Suruchi's uncle left school at 16 to work to support the family, but her father went on to college and became an engineer. At the age of 27, with a good job and career prospects, he married Suruchi's mother in an arranged match. The couple moved to Calcutta, in the early 1960s. Like other children and grandchildren of partition, Suruchi struggles with the "where are you from" question. I've been to Punjab once and I speak the language, but I'm very much Bengali because I grew up there. However, my natal name, Sud, gives away the fact I'm not Bengali. It's a Punjabi or Himachal name. Suruchi Sud's story. We're going to switch now to Hyderabad, which I think sort of, to me, well illustrates just the kind of the problems and the tragedy of how British India was divided. And as you see, it's sort of in the south central part of the country. And it had been ruled since the 17th century by a dynasty called the Nizams of Hyderabad. This was the guy, Sir Osman Ali Khan, who was in charge, the ruler, in 1947. It was a prosperous city. It was a mostly Muslim city surrounded by, the agricultural areas around were mostly Hindu. So what you're looking at on the left is Charminar, the 4 towers in the Muslim old city, where there are all of these jewelry workshops and craft workshops, and a huge mosque as well. It's a fascinating part of the city. So in 1947, Osman Ali Khan found himself in a tough spot. Britain had abandoned its alliances with the traditional rulers like him and leaving the future of their states uncertain. And so I said one by one, they decided to join either India or Pakistan based primarily on whether they had majority Hindu or Muslim populations. Now this guy, Osman Ali Khan, was a holdout. He was perhaps the most important traditional ruler in British India. His family, his dynasty had ruled Hyderabad since the 17th century. The country was, Hyderabad was about as large as Britain itself, and it was prosperous. Here it was in 1947, a population of 16 million, economy the size of Belgium's, lots of precious gems there, and a well-developed area, agriculture, health services, education system, had its own airline, radio broadcasting service, issued its own currency. You look at all of this and you go, this is a viable country. There are lots of countries in the world today with a much smaller population and a much smaller economy. Okay? Why couldn't Hyderabad become a country on its own? Which is exactly what Osman Ali Khan said. And, he had some money behind him as well. I mean, Time reckoned him to be the richest man in the world in 1937, and he had all of, all of the accoutrements of being a traditional ruler, a big art collection, and he'd also been a very faithful ally of the British. He'd sent his tax money to support the British in World War I, and, he had been, he was well respected by the British. So, I mean, what he said was basically, I'm going to sort of summarize what turned to be weeks and weeks of discussions. There's a fascinating museum in Hyderabad that sort of shows the long negotiations that took place. Basically, what he says was, okay, I mean, why cannot Hyderabad become a constitutional monarchy within the great British Commonwealth? God save King George. He may not have said God save King George. I'm making that up. But he's arguing that why do I have to join India or Pakistan? Why can't Hyderabad be its own country? We've got a well-developed economy, got a large enough population, independent Hyderabad. Of course, this worried India a lot because I'm just going to flick back to the maps here. As you see, having an independent country called Hyderabad in the middle of India is a recipe for problems. Which other traditional rulers suddenly go to say, oh, well, I think I want to be a constitutional monarchy too. So the Indians sort of put up with this for about a year, and then they invaded from four sides, it was something called Operation Polo. Why they give these names to military operations? I mean, polo, the favorite sport of English and Indian cavalry officers, I don't know. But anyway, it was all over very quickly. India invaded, and Hyderabad became the next state of India. And this was followed by widespread communal violence. This again is an estimate in what the Indian government called a police action. Osman Ali Khan stayed on, in a, shall we say, a more ritual role and tried to contribute to economic development and reduce sectarian divisions there. But I mean, a good example of why, shall we say, the folly of division along religious lines. So this is the other view of India, okay? The contrast to what I was taught in school. This is from Shashi Tharoor, a pretty well-known Indian intellectual. And, he says, the British seized one of the richest countries in the world and over 200 years of colonial rule reduced it to one of the poorest. And the book is worth reading, Inglorious Empire, and it kind of represents one perspective there. But I mean, what I will say here is that a lot of my Indian friends and colleagues, shall we say, take a more nuanced road. They say, yes, this is true. On the other hand, I went to a British university, and the British did build the railroads, and they did establish the education system, and they did establish the civil service, even though we don't like the bureaucrats. So it's a complicated kind of historical picture. One way to look at this is, how fast India has been to rename cities, to take away the old British names here. And it hasn't been a big rush, actually. About 100 cities and towns have been renamed since 1947. I mean, we're talking 70 years almost, yeah. But that leaves hundreds more that still have their colonial era names. And we'll take the example here of Bangalore, which I think most people still call Bangalore. They don't use the new word, Bengaluru City, or Bengaluru. So the movement to change the name from Bangalore to Bengaluru came ahead of the city's 500th anniversary in 2006. And the bureaucracy took about a decade to push through these changes. So they changed all the signs, the official signs, the airport monitors, the website, and all of that. But a lot of residents still use the old names, as they use the old names for other cities. I mean, I try to be very culturally sensitive there, and I will talk about Mumbai, and I will talk about Chennai and Bengaluru, and sometimes Indians, look at me and they give me these quizzical looks. They say, Mumbai? Oh, you mean Bombay? Oh, right. Okay, now I understand what you're saying. So it's quite interesting what's going on. Suruchi Sud, who we met a few minutes ago, returns to India about once a year for work or family visits. And she reports a moment of panic when she was, I think, in Delhi, and she was going to take an internal flight to what she thought was Madras. And she goes to the gate and she sees the name Chennai up there. And for a moment, she thought she was flying to another city, a different city. So there's this kind of very interesting kind of dissonance between or ambivalence about the colonial past, which is no doubt the British East India Company plundered India for all that it had, but still there's a positive legacy there as well. Okay. One of the legacies of the British is the civil service. Okay, and I was happy to find this cartoon, Lord of the Files. I mean, I think every country, has bad things to say about its bureaucrats, but maybe India has the edge on this in terms of bureaucracy. I don't know. It's maybe a close competition with some other places. So, in the colonial era, the Indian Civil Service, the ICS, established by the British, took charge of all administrative and legal matters, and it was responsible for maintaining law and order. The British trained thousands and thousands of clerks to do all the legwork, all the daily administrative stuff, and in fact sent them all around the world to other British colonies as well. And the civil service was kind of the glue that held the British administration together. I can't do Lloyd George's accent. He was Welsh, and I can't do a good Welsh accent. But speaking in the House of Commons in 1935, he described the Indian civil service as the steel frame on which the whole structure of our government in India rests. And I mean, it was no exaggeration. Well, India's independence leader, Jawaharlal Nehru, famously described the Indian civil service as neither Indian nor civil nor a service. But having said that, he didn't change it. He kept the civil service, right? While changing its name to the Indian Administrative Service. And there's long been agreement amongst Indian political parties and certainly the business community on the need for civil service reform. National and state governments allocate vast sums for health, education, water, sanitation. Some's wasted because it's siphoned off. There's certainly corruption within the civil service. And you'll see the figure at the bottom, and I'm waiting for the Economist to produce the new estimate here. 14 million civil servants in 2010. And I'm sure that's grown since then, despite the fact that 4 or 5 blue ribbon panels have been appointed by the Indian government to reform the civil service. So if you look at that number, 14 million, actually that's a couple of million more than the population of Belgium or Greece in terms of civil service. And I need to explain the word babu. Because when the Indian media talk about the civil servants, they talk about the babudom. The title babu is derived from the word bapu, which in South Asia means father or grandfather, generally used as a sign of respect towards men. In the colonial era, babu became the common term for a literate Indian clerk in the Indian civil service, the ICS. But from the 20th century, it began to take on negative connotations when used to refer to government bureaucrats and other officials. And as I say, there's been many attempts to reform the civil service, and there've been minor changes, but most have really failed to now, of course, you need a civil service, but trying to make it work more efficiently is the issue. And I mean, I think anybody who's visited India will have had some encounters with the civil service, which tends to sort of branch out into all sorts of areas. I've worked with All India Radio, the National Radio Service, and Doordarshan, the National Television Service. And by themselves, they have a huge bureaucracy, and navigating that bureaucracy to get something done is quite a challenge. Okay, we're going to kind of wrap up here, and I probably will be finishing a bit before time here, but that's good because we can have some questions and comments. We're going to wrap up here in Hyderabad. As I say, my virtual background is Golconda, the great fortress outside Hyderabad here. It's a city I've been to several times, and I think it illustrates some of the paradoxes of India. One of my university colleagues there, Usha Rahman, describes her city as a soft landing for first-time Western visitors to India. The traffic jams are annoying, certainly, but congestion eases at predictable times. The pollution levels are high, yes, but maybe no higher than in some other urban areas. There's poverty, but it's not the kind of in-the-face variety that you get in Delhi or Mumbai, where there are panhandlers and organized betting. The Hyderabad and its twin city, Secunderabad, one of India's 8 megacities, a population of more than 5 million. Again, I actually don't have a current figure on this, but I mean, I like to do these little comparisons here. Its population is the size of such and such a country. So the pictures on the left indicate the sort of Hyderabad that the city government, the business community wants the world to see. Okay, with Bengaluru, in terms of its IT sector. That's pretty important there. So there's this image of a bustling modern city, thriving retail, financial and technology sectors, an educated workforce. But as in every Indian city, wealth and poverty exist side by side. A few blocks away from the commercial streets, from the five-star hotels and the gated communities with their guard posts and their artificial lakes, there's another Hyderabad. The picture on the left is from a little informal settlement called Enbette Nagar. I was there with the UNICEF team. We were looking at water and sanitation issues. About 30 families living in this settlement by a lake. There is one water standpipe for the whole community. As you see, the houses or the huts are built out of pieces of corrugated metal, some wood, plastic, and things like that. And the materials have been salvaged. They're framed by bamboo poles. They have bricks or blocks weighing down the roofs and plastic bags plugging the holes to keep out the monsoon rains. And what the people there told us was that when the monsoon rains come and, the lake overflows, certainly the community floods and then the snakes get into your houses. So an unpleasant place to live. So, but this is literally, a few hundred yards away from a busy commercial street. And I think I'm just sort of going to take you there here. So actually, I walked out of this community with some colleagues. I think we were going to a biryani restaurant. Biryani Hyderabad is famous for, and you kind of pass this kind of landscape. So this is, just right off a commercial street. So we got some chickens pecking around in the dirt here. We have this horse standing in this tarpaulin-covered makeshift stall. And we've got this little SUV jacked up. It's missing a wheel or so, and a camel tethered to it. And I kind of wanted to think, oh my goodness me, is this a traditional form of transportation in this city? Is this a city where you use your smartphone and Uber to call an auto rickshaw? But what I was told actually was that camels are popular at middle-class children's birthday parties. But this is side by side with a very, very modern commercial street, and just a few hundred yards away from that slum that we just saw, Enbette Nagar. And I use these two images here to really sort of, stress the contrast in Hyderabad. To the kind of the northwest part of the city, there's actually sort of a third city that's developed, mostly for the IT sector. It's called Cyberabad, place of cyber, or high-tech city, HITEC city. And of course that's an acronym for the Hyderabad Information Technology and Engineering Consultancy City, which is quite a mouthful, so you definitely need an acronym for that. So the city's growth has owed a lot to the pharmaceutical, biomedical, and the IT sectors and the industries that support them. It's also a major destination for medical tourists, 800 to 1,000 a month, mostly from other Asian and some African countries coming for treatment. So if you need a hip replacement, a hair transplant, or just a bit of plastic surgery, Hyderabad's got a place for you. So it's estimated about 1,100 IT firms in the city, and the building on the left is where they first set up. This is called the Cyber Towers, 10 stories of it. And Microsoft, when Microsoft set up there in 1998, other companies rushed to fill the office space. But it's kind of interesting that just as Charminar on the right and the old Muslim old city has these 4 towers, Cyber Towers is divided into 4 quadrants with a fountain in the middle, but its towers are topped with satellite dishes and satellite and microwave dishes, not with minarets. I'm going to just end our little tour of Hyderabad with another reading and sort of one of these, this could only happen in India kind of experiences. And I call it Desperately Seeking SIM Card. Let me just get to my point here. All right. And I mean, I'm here in a city that seems to be able to offer everything in terms of products and services. So my story begins at the reception desk of the Taj Deccan Hotel. That was a hotel you sort of saw at the beginning with that uniformed doorman. Where's the nearest mall? I asked the duty manager. I need to buy a SIM card. Sir, the city centre mall is close by, but I deeply regret to inform you that you will not be able to buy a SIM card there. You must go to a mobile provider shop. I didn't bother asking about the marketing logic of restricting SIM card sales to specific outlets, presumably with limited opening hours. Okay, please give me the addresses, I said. The manager wrote down 3. You could walk, but in this heat I'd advise taking an auto rickshaw, he said. I selected the closest one, Airtel, whose address was listed as Road Number 12, Banjara Hills. It seemed a bit imprecise, but I assumed the driver would know where to go. The duty manager approached me again. Do you have a copy of your passport, face page and visa? Also a passport picture, he asked. I really need all that? I answered, but with almost rhetorical resignation. Yes, and you will need a letter from the hotel stating that this is your local address. I'll be pleased to write it. After assembling the paperwork, I set off in an auto rickshaw. Not this one, this is my last driver, but it's the only illustration I have for this section here. We turned off the main road onto road number 12. After a few minutes, I remembered the manager's remark that I could have walked to the store if the temperature had not been so hot. I would not have walked this far even if the temperature had been 20 degrees lower. We were now moving out of the commercial area, passing a hospital, villas, and the gardens of the income tax department guest house. More of the bureaucracy. I don't think it's this far, I told the driver. Where is it you want, sir? This is road number 12. The Airtel mobile shop. You can buy a recharge at many places. No, I need a SIM card, not a recharge. Please turn around. Eventually we did, then sat in a traffic jam for 15 minutes as we edged slowly towards the main road. The Airtel store was near the junction and the detour had cost me almost 30 minutes. I joined a line of customers. The sales assistant scrutinized my passport and visa page copies. I was half expecting him to ask for a notarized copy, but he didn't. His only comment was on the passport picture, which was too large for the box on the registration form. "Feel free to cut it down," I said. I asked when my SIM card would be activated. "Sir, tomorrow is a holiday. It will take 3 days." He could sense my displeasure. "But you can go to the Airtel head office and they can activate it by this evening." I asked for the address. It was at least reasonably precise. Splendid Towers. They have these wonderful names for office buildings. Splendid Towers near Begumpet Police Station. "Yes, sir, I know it well," said this guy, my next auto rickshaw driver. It turned out that he didn't. We stopped several times on our way across the city so that he could ask for directions, and once so he could buy a coconut milk. We got there eventually. "I wait for you, sir?" he asked. I said no. I had no idea how long the transaction would take. The application form for a SIM card is a page long with many boxes to complete. Most of the questions from the information on my passport and visa, but needed additional data. "What is the name of your father?" he asked. I wondered briefly about questioning the relevance of this item, considering that my father died 30 years ago, but thought better of it. The assistant was simply following instructions. "I also need the names, addresses, and mobile numbers for 2 people in Hyderabad." I listed the numbers of 2 colleagues from the University of Hyderabad, but this time felt justified in asking why their mobile numbers were needed. "So we can notify them by text when your SIM card is activated." "Why can't you text me on my number?" "No, sir, we're not allowed to do this. Please inform them they will receive a text." I was about to ask how I was supposed to do this if I did not have a working mobile phone, but decided to go with the flow. "Now you must sign," said the assistant. I signed in 3 places on the application form and on the copies of the passport and visa. "I'd like to buy some time while I'm here," I added. "We cannot sell you time until your phone is activated," the assistant replied. "Seriously?" He did not see the irony. "You will go online to Airtel. There you will find some most attractive data packages," he said. Half an hour later, I was back at the hotel. The expedition had taken more than 2 hours, and all I had to show for it was a 25 rupee, at that time about 40 cent, SIM card with no credit. I'd spent almost 700 rupees, $10, on circuitous auto rickshaw rides, but at least I collected a few good travel notes along the way, so I could have this story. Airtel would not accept my credit card. Over a dinner, a university colleague said he would add credit and I could pay him back. Later, I received a text saying that 500 rupees had been added, followed by another text saying my credit was under 5 rupees and I could not make any calls or send texts. I gave up and went to bed. The next morning, the credit had been activated. I felt newly empowered. And to me, that really is the epitome of that quote that I used at the beginning of this presentation from the travel writer Thomas Swick. Travel is only interesting when things go wrong. So these stories are some of those in my second book, Monsoon Postcards, Indian Ocean Journeys, which is available if you're interested. And actually, if you want to check out a little bit more, I actually did 2 interviews on the Travel with Rick Steves radio. You could probably find with a search function there, or if you're interested, shoot me an email and I can do that. And I didn't put I'm going to put my email into the chat box here if you would like to contact me. But thank you all very much for attending the webinar. I'll be really, really happy to take any questions that you have here, and I'm going to stop the share here and probably hand back to Meg or Jennifer. Yeah, okay.
Your first question here is asking how the country has been affected by COVID.
Wow, let's sort of think about how a country like this deals with COVID. I mean, it's been absolutely tragic in many ways. Firstly, as every country tried to do most countries tried to do in one way or another, they tried to. Hang on, I'm just going to. I'll put my thing there. As many countries tried to do, it tried to lock down. But look at the situation in a country like India, where asking people to work from home. I mean, that will work for people in the IT sector and that, but for most of the population, that's impossible. A huge part of the population are day laborers. They are in the cities, they come from the countryside, and every day they stand on a street corner and try to get some sort of work. What was to happen to them? They shut down public transportation, all of the commercial businesses shut down, and they were literally left stranded. I mean, walking sometimes hundreds of miles along the road to try to get back to their villages where at least they would have some food. So that was one issue. I mean, the healthcare system is certainly basic in many areas. I mean, they simply didn't have the staff and the facilities. And I think, the most tragic pictures we saw at various times were people driving their relatives around, trying to get them into hospitals, which were turning them away. And later on, trying to get oxygen tanks, which were not available. So, what can I say? The medical supply chain in India really, really failed, and we'll never know how many people died. I mean, most people are cremated after death, and so the figures that were even reported, the statistics reported, were widely thought to be lower, the official government statistics lower than they actually were, because so many deaths, especially in rural areas, went unrecorded. So we'll never know how many people died. The other thing here is that how do you do social distancing in India? Or indeed in other countries there, where people are packed so closely together, when people are literally in the cities living on top of each other. And I mean on top of each other, almost on the street with, one family living in some little shack and another one on top. I mean, the kind of precautions that people were able to take in developed countries was simply not possible for most people in India. So I'm not a public health expert, I'm not an epidemiologist, and I don't have the current numbers on this, but what I would say here is that the number of deaths in India that were reported by the government, both federal and state, grossly underestimated the real impact there. And then, of course, the economic impact. I mean, the other astonishing thing that happened last fall when Delta was going strong was that there were election campaigns going in several states in I forget where, certainly in West Bengal, and the politicians who were urging people to be cautious and not do this and not do that were holding mass election rallies with thousands of people, most of them unmasked, gathered together. So it's been a very, very some things have been done right. I mean, India also, I think, is the major producer of vaccine, and that's been one bonus there. But and I'm really not sure what the government should have done in this case. I mean, but certainly the economic impact on on millions of people was very, very severe, and the number of deaths grossly underreported. So that's really all I could say. I'm sure there's some more reliable sources than me to read up on that. Thanks.
Okay. Sandra says, thank you for your presentation. I was told by a friend when I travel to India to avoid the tribal lands. Can you speak to this location? How many people live there? Why is it so separate? And why doesn't it have a specific name?
I don't know which because there are quite a few tribal lands in different states here. I think I'm going to dodge that question, but I think I'm going to sort of reserve judgment on that because I don't know enough about that. I mean, the tribal groups, live mostly in forested areas or rather remote areas, and I mean, I would, and they have often been marginalized there. In some areas of central India, in the tribal areas, there was a group called the Naxalites, who are Maoist guerrillas. We still have Maoist guerrillas anywhere in the world who are fighting for peasants' rights against rich landowners and things like that. So I think there's a level of violence in some rural areas. Now, there's another part of India that we haven't talked about, which I have visited a little bit in the northeast, places like Nagaland, which is close to Burma, where there are active resistance movements going on, rebel resistance movements going on. So if I knew the tribal area we were talking about, I wouldn't maybe speak to that, but I could certainly perhaps find an answer on that. So. Again, as with all of these things here, local knowledge is really important here. And, if local people say, don't go there, don't go there. I mean, it's really as simple as that. But, I don't think we can sort of say all tribal areas are dangerous. I've got something of a relationship with a university in West Bengal that's, a tribal university in a tribal area. As far as I know, everything's fine there. So, again, a little difficult to generalize about this. I don't think we could say all tribal areas will be dangerous. Some will be, but, there'll be others that are probably perfectly fine. I'm sorry about my evasive. It's not meant to be an evasive question. It's rather an answer which says, well, there's a lot more that obviously I need to know about this. Sorry.
Okay. Could you describe economic classes a little more? Example, in Hyderabad, in terms of work they do and the way they live, what is the most populous level and how do they compare with the U.S.?
Could you just repeat the question there?
Okay, they're asking you to describe the economic classes a little more. For example, in Hyderabad, what work does each class do? What is their lifestyle, and what is the most populous level in that range?
Okay, all right. Well, the largest class of people are going to be sort of in this group that I sort of talked a little bit about in connection with COVID, who would be day laborers, okay? And those would be people who, on a daily basis, try to get work. It might be in construction or, it might be in transportation, pulling, carts around markets and things like that. But they're employed day by day. There are, some people working in factories, textile factories and things like that. There are, and then sort of up above that, you'd have sort of this group of people who are kind of the auto rickshaw drivers, and people have they have little tea stalls and very small businesses, above that, you'll certainly have a commercial and a professional middle class, and then you'll have those who are quite well educated. So, Hyderabad, is, like every Indian city. Most of the people are going to be, in that kind of working class, category, and not necessarily day laborers. I mean, there'll be women who, take in washing and, and do cooking and things like that. So, but a lot of people living literally from day to day. What work can I find today? How do I get through the day? How do I feed my family for the day? Okay. And then, as I say, there's sort of this group of kind of self-employed people, most of whom, by the way, don't pay any taxes at all, running, tea stalls and market stalls and auto rickshaw drivers. And then above that, those who would have, shops and have some professional, some professional, and then there'll be, the doctors and the engineers and the IT people and group above that. So Hyderabad is probably, I mean, it's not the poorest city in India by any means. It's probably better off than some, but I feel the majority of the population are going to be in that kind of, working class, day laborer, occasional work category. I guess that's the best way I can answer that question.
Okay. We're still in that topic. They ask, can you talk about the large middle class with spending power that's changing India?
Yeah. The question is, how large is that middle class? Okay, but absolutely, India has transformed with an expanding middle class, where education levels have risen and spending power has risen. So this is where the economy has really grown, and it's mostly in the cities. I mean, Mumbai, for example, is the financial capital of India, and so that has a pretty large middle class as well. In other cities, people are more in the education and government sectors. In Bengaluru, and Hyderabad and a few other places, IT sector, pharmaceuticals and things like that. So yeah, definitely the middle class is what has driven economic development there. They've got more disposable income. They can buy apartments. They can buy cars. I mean, so this has fueled consumer industries in the country. And so, I mean, there's a huge domestic consumer market. And I mean, the point I would make here is that India, after independence, had a large degree of state control of industry. So a lot of industries were either owned by the state or partly owned or controlled. So, really for the last 30, 40 years, India has been liberalizing its business, making it easier for companies to start up, divesting state enterprises and things like that. Now, the railroads, for example, are still government owned, and so are a few other things there. But, the IT sector is a good one, or the mobile phone sector. I mean, that's completely commercial now. So the kind of the liberalizing of the economy, and I mean, a lot of people in India, a lot of business people in India will say, well, there's still a lot of liberalizing that needs to be done here. There are still too many regulations there. But that really, I think, has kind of unleashed consumer spending and pushed the economy that way. That's the best answer I could give to that, although, again, it's not quite my topic. Okay.
Has anything been done to curb begging in the major cities? It seems to be something that has been accepted or tolerated by the authorities.
Mm-hmm. I'm sure there are periodic crackdowns on it, but I think it's, it's something that people sort of do accept. I think the thing, I mean, the really pernicious part of begging is the organized begging. I mean, almost the commercialized and strategic begging, where beggars are sent out, appropriately clothed or unclothed, to strategic locations, and they beg and they bring back their money, and then I guess their begging pimp takes a cut in it. So that kind of organized begging, I think the police have tried to stop that. Individual begging, that's going to go on. When you have a lot of poor people, there will be begging, and I mean, I don't think it's I'd love somebody native to India to have a view on this, but I would say that it's not considered socially unacceptable to beg. Begging is not sort of necessarily looked down on. It's recognized as something that probably will happen. So I'm sure there have been attempts in cities to clean things up and move the beggars along and stop organized begging at certain places. But inevitably it will continue. I don't know what you can do. So
yes, it's a fact of life.
Yes, a fact of life. Yes.
So, you've not mentioned Gandhi or cattle and their effect. Can you comment?
Not mentioned Gandhi.
Gandhi or cattle and their effects.
Cattle?
Yeah,
Cows?
I'm sorry. Yeah.
Cows.
I don't write the questions.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I mean, let's talk about Gandhi. The great independence leader there. Gandhi, understandably, still much revered in India, although this is a very different India today from Gandhi's India. And Gandhi's family, his descendants have had, shall we say, somewhat checkered political careers. I mean, Gandhi was incredibly important. I mean, Gandhi, in terms of his philosophy of passive resistance, was a really, really important independence leader. There were others in the movement who were maybe a little bit more politically savvy or realistic, but I mean, Gandhi made a huge difference. So no wonder he's revered. Now, the question about cattle, I'm not quite sure. Cows are sacred to the Hindus, and cows wander up and down the road.
It was in the same question, so.
All right, okay. Maybe we can ask for a little clarification on the cattle there. I'm not quite sure where the cattle and Gandhi were in the same question, but whatever.
Okay. I have someone saying they recall in the history that in the description there would be a history of Jews in India. I went back and read the description. That wasn't in there. I'm sure you won't be discussing that.
No, I haven't. I mean, I think it actually is a fascinating topic, but it's one that I haven't looked at. I mean, Jews did settle in many areas of India, and were probably there's a place in the southwest in the state of Kerala called Cochin, and I was there a few years ago. And there's actually an area there called Jewtown, and the remains of a synagogue. So a lot of the Jewish communities did move on, but again, that's not my topic there. So I'm sure the questioner can find something about it, and I'll make a note to try and find out something myself if that question comes up again.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Stephanie says, if I'm obsessed with cleanliness and lack of bureaucracy, is there an Indian resort where I would like to visit?
So maybe, I don't know. You can probably get somewhere clean. I don't know. Lack of bureaucracy may be the real challenge there, because I think you're going to find that anywhere. I mean, there are some good hill stations. I mean, there are lots and lots of places in India that that absolutely are nice and clean and well maintained. But I do find the bureaucracy tends to permeate everything there. So I think you can find a clean place, an unbureaucratic place. No, you just have to live with the bureaucracy. I'm sorry. It's a fact of life, and you laugh about it, and you kind of you go with the flow on that, because it's simply part of living and traveling in India.
Okay. And you do have a question. Did you spend much time in Delhi? Where did it go? I was there from 1956 to 1959.
Oh, I wasn't there then.
Neither was I.
But I have actually spent quite a bit of time in Delhi fairly recently there, and I'm sure even in 1956 to 1959, the weather in August was brutally hot. I mean, Delhi's pretty interesting because there's the old. I mean, I didn't. I mean, where do I go with a presentation like this? There are so many ways to go. I mean, the old city and the Red Fort, absolutely fascinating. And then there's this whole new city, well, it's a new city, New Delhi, not new anymore, which has these rather, it's kind of almost manicured, there were these wide boulevards and these hedges and these villas where government officials and the professional classes live. I mean, that's where the Prime Minister lived. One of the most interesting places I went to, and I'll be interested to see if your questioner knows the place. A friend of mine took me to a place called the Delhi Gymkhana Club, which is like this old British club which has sort of survived colonial times, which is like just over the wall from the Prime Minister Narendra Modi's residence there. But I mean, you've got these sort of white-shirted waiters, and people are playing billiards, and there's a polo ground and all of that. It's kind of like, whoa, where am I? Am I sort of drifted back in time to one of these period dramas? So yeah, Delhi's interesting. I mean, it's polluted. They've made some big changes recently because they put in a subway system which actually has taken some cars off the road, and it's quite interesting as well. Back to almost. I'm not recommending the previous questioner go and take a vacation in the Delhi subway system, but about cleanliness. The one comment that I heard, and when I went on the subway system, it was kind of reinforced. People will throw litter on the street. You'll see people casting litter without any thought at all. But in the subway system, no. We're very proud of that. We're not going to litter the subway system. So, the cleanest part of Delhi is probably down in one of the subway stations, ironically. Anyway. But no, Delhi's a fascinating place, and again, poor quarters, richer quarters, upscale, downscale. A lot of diversity. A very, very vibrant city, but try to go when it's not so steaming hot. Oh, it couldn't be terrible. All right.
Okay, it's pretty much time for us to wrap up.
All right. Okay. Well,
I could go on for. There's many more questions,
oh my goodness me.
Lots of wonderful comments about how wonderful your presentation was and how much you brought India alive, and so. But I really do have to end this. I'm so sorry.
Okay, let me just say to people there, and I didn't have a chance to put it into the. Let me put it into the chat box if I can here. I'm just going to write my email.
Okay. davidhmould@gmail.com. You've got to get the H in there.
And just to say to people, I'd be really happy to correspond with you. If you're a member of a group that would like a presentation, I mean, not necessarily, not this one, but I've got, a bunch of other travel presentations. I'd be happy to send you a little list. This has been one of the things that sort of kept me going while I haven't been able to travel, doing presentations about travel and places. So I've done a bunch for public libraries and for some other groups as well. So if you're in a group and you want to hear about Bangladesh or Madagascar or borders or Indonesia or somewhere like that, I'll be happy to sign up for that. So yeah, so thanks to everybody, and stay warm, stay safe, and maybe I will see you all again virtually sometime. Thank you.
Thank you so much.